The dust devils were already swirling across the prairie when Julia Daniels saw the line of riders approaching her ranch, and she knew with a terrible certainty that this was the day everything would either end or begin. She stood on the porch of the modest ranch house her father had built with his own hands, shading her eyes against the brutal Wyoming sun, counting 6 men on horseback, moving with the deliberate pace of those who believed themselves untouchable. Her father had been dead only 3 months, buried on the hill overlooking the valley he loved, and already the vultures were circling. South Pass City had seen better days. The gold rush that had brought thousands of prospectors to this high Wyoming territory back in the 1860s had faded to a memory. And now, in the summer of 1878, only the stubborn remained. Julia's father, Michael Daniels, had been one of the stubborn ones. He had come for gold but stayed for the land, purchasing this ranch with legitimate money and legitimate papers, building something real out of the wild country. Julia had grown up here, learning to ride before she could properly read, learning to shoot before she learned to dance, and learning that the land could be both generous and cruel in equal measure. The riders were close enough now that she could make out faces. Raymond Calhoun rode in front, a prosperous rancher whose ambitions had always exceeded his ethics. Beside him was his son Marcus, a young man whose cruelty showed in the set of his mouth. The other 4 were hired guns, the kind of men who drifted through mining towns and cattle country selling their loyalty to whoever paid the most. Julia felt her heart hammering but kept her face composed. Her father had taught her never to show fear, especially not to men like these. They reined in their horses at the fence line, and Raymond Calhoun removed his hat in a mockery of courtesy. He was a large man gone to fat with eyes like river stones. "Miss Daniels," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the yard, "I hope you have been considering our offer." "There is no offer to consider," Julia replied, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "This ranch is not for sale, Mr. Calhoun. Not now, not ever." Calhoun's expression hardened. "That is a foolish position for a young woman alone. You cannot work this land by yourself. You have no husband, no brothers, no protection. It would be far better for everyone if you accepted a fair price and relocated to somewhere more suitable for a lady." "I was born on this land," Julia said, feeling anger beginning to burn through her fear. "My father built every building you see with his own hands. He has a deed registered in the territorial office, signed and legal. This ranch belongs to me now, and you have no claim to it." Marcus Calhoun laughed, a harsh sound that made Julia's skin crawl. "Deeds can be challenged. A single woman has no business trying to run a cattle operation. The courts would see reason." "The courts would see what your father paid them to see," Julia shot back before she could stop herself. Raymond Calhoun's face darkened dangerously. "You should watch your tongue, girl. You're alone out here. Accidents happen on ranches all the time. Fires, stampedes, all manner of unfortunate incidents." Julia's hand moved instinctively toward the rifle leaning against the porch post beside her, but she never reached it. A new voice cut through the tension, calm and unmistakably dangerous. "The lady asked you to leave." Everyone turned. A single rider had approached from the east, moving so quietly that none of them had noticed until he spoke. He sat astride a gray gelding, tall and lean in the saddle, with the relaxed posture of a man completely comfortable with potential violence. He wore dusty trail clothes and a dark hat pulled low, but what drew Julia's attention was the way he carried himself, the absolute certainty in his bearing. He was perhaps 28 or 30, with a weathered face that suggested he had seen most of what the frontier had to offer and been unimpressed. "This is private business, stranger," Raymond Calhoun said, his voice tight with anger at the interruption. "Move along." The stranger guided his horse through the open gate with the ease of someone who belonged there. "I work here," he said simply, "which makes it my business when uninvited guests threaten my employer." Julia stared at him, confusion mixing with her fear and anger. She had never seen this man before in her life. She had no hired hands, no money to pay wages. Her small savings were barely enough to keep herself fed through the winter, let alone employ help. "You are a liar," Marcus Calhoun said flatly. "The Daniels girl has no ranch hands. Everyone in the territory knows that." The stranger finally turned his full attention to the Calhouns, and something in his gaze made even the hired guns shift nervously in their saddles. Then I suppose everyone in the territory needs to update their information. My name is Travis Morgan. I signed on with Miss Daniels 2 weeks ago. Room, board, and a share of the profits, all legal and proper. Raymond Calhoun's eyes narrowed suspiciously. I have heard that name. Travis Morgan. You were a deputy marshal in Montana Territory. I was a lot of things, Travis said, his voice giving nothing away. Right now, I am a ranch hand who does not appreciate strangers making threats against his employer. So I will say this once more, and I suggest you listen carefully. This land belongs to her now. You have no claim, no right, and no business being here. Leave. The moment stretched out, taut as a drawn bowstring. Julia could see the calculations running behind Raymond Calhoun's eyes, weighing options, considering possibilities. Finally, he settled his hat back on his head and gathered his reins. This is not finished, he said, looking past Travis to Julia. You will regret your stubbornness, Miss Daniels. Mark my words. I will mark them as the empty threats they are, Julia replied, finding courage in the presence of her unexpected defender. Now get off my property. The Calhouns and their hired men turned their horses and rode away, but the threat lingered in the air like smoke. Julia watched until they disappeared over the rise, then turned to face the stranger who had just claimed to work for her. Travis Morgan had dismounted and was loosening the cinch on his saddle, apparently unconcerned with the confrontation that had just taken place. Up close, Julia could see more details. He had dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, eyes the color of mountain granite, and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. His hands were competent and calloused, the hands of someone who knew hard work. He looked at her finally, and something in his expression was almost apologetic. I took a liberty, he said quietly, but it seemed like you could use an ally just then. Who are you really? Julia demanded, trying to sort through her confusion. Why did you help me? Travis finished with his horse and straightened, meeting her eyes directly. I told you the truth. My name is Travis Morgan. I was riding through South Pass City yesterday, heard talk in the saloon about Raymond Calhoun planning to run you off your land. Figured that did not sit right with me. So you just decided to ride out here and pretend to work for me? Julia shook her head in disbelief. That makes no sense. You do not even know me. I knew your father, Travis said, and something in his voice made Julia go still. Not well, but I met him once about 5 years back. I was tracking a horse thief through this territory, and your father gave me a meal and a place to sleep. Would not take any payment. Just said that hospitality was what separated civilized folks from animals. He was a good man. When I heard he had passed and that Calhoun was trying to steal his daughter's inheritance, I figured I owed him a debt. Julia felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. That sounds like something my father would have done. But Mr. Morgan, I cannot actually hire you. I barely have enough money to feed myself. I certainly cannot pay wages. I meant what I said about room and board, Travis replied. And I do not need much. A place to sleep, decent food, and honest work. In return, I will help you run this ranch until you are on solid ground. If it makes a profit, we can talk about wages then. If it does not, at least you will have had help trying. But why? Julia asked, genuinely confused by this stranger's generosity. You could find paid work anywhere. Why would you work for nothing? Travis was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. Because I am tired of watching powerful men take things from people who cannot fight back. I spent 10 years as a lawman, and I saw too much of it. Sometimes the law protects people. Sometimes it just protects money and power. Your father was decent to me when he did not have to be. The least I can do is make sure his daughter keeps what is rightfully hers. Julia studied him, trying to read the truth behind his words. Everything about this situation should have made her wary. A strange man riding in out of nowhere, inserting himself into her life, claiming altruistic motives. But she had learned to read people growing up in rough country, and there was something fundamentally honest about Travis Morgan. The lines around his eyes spoke of someone who had seen trouble and walked away from it. The set of his shoulders suggested a man who could be relied upon, and God knew she needed help desperately. All right, she said finally, making a decision that felt both reckless and right. Room and board and a share of profits if there are any, But I warn you, Mr. Morgan, this will not be easy. The Calhouns will not give up, and I have a lot of work ahead to make this ranch productive." "I did not expect easy," Travis said, and for the first time, something that might have been a smile touched his mouth. "And you should call me Travis if we are going to be working together." "Julia," she replied, extending her hand. His grip was firm and warm, and the handshake sealed something between them, a partnership born of necessity but perhaps containing the seeds of something more. The next 2 weeks proved Travis right about nothing being easy. Julia showed him around the ranch, and he assessed the situation with the practiced eye of someone who understood both land and livestock. The ranch consisted of 300 acres of decent grazing land, a house that needed repairs, a barn in better condition than the house, and a herd of cattle that numbered around 60 head. It was enough to make a living if everything went right, but there was precious little margin for error. Travis threw himself into the work with an intensity that surprised Julia. He was up before dawn, tending to the horses, mending fences, checking on the cattle. Julia worked alongside him, refusing to be treated as delicate despite his occasional attempts at chivalry. She had been running this ranch alone since her father's death, and she knew every inch of the land, every temperamental cow, every weak point in the infrastructure. They fell into a rhythm, working through the long summer days, eating simple meals together in the evening, exchanging stories about their lives. Julia learned that Travis had been born in Texas, the youngest of 5 brothers, and had left home at 16 to find his own way. He had worked cattle drives, fought in range wars, eventually pinned on a badge because someone had to stand between the lawless and the innocent. He had seen friends die, had killed men when he had no choice, and had finally walked away from law work when the politics became more important than the justice. Travis learned that Julia was 22 years old, that her mother had died of fever when she was 10, and that her father had raised her with a curious mix of frontier practicality and genuine education. She could quote Shakespeare as easily as she could brand a calf, could discuss philosophy while setting a broken fence post. She had never wanted anything but this ranch, this life, and she would fight with everything she had to keep it. The Calhouns made their next move on a hot afternoon when Julia and Travis were working on repairing the barn roof. They heard the cattle first, the sound of them running, the panicked bellowing that meant danger. Travis was off the roof and running for the horses before Julia could even process what was happening. She scrambled down after him, her heart pounding with dread. They found the break in the fence quickly enough. Someone had cut the wire, creating a gap wide enough for the cattle to pour through. Worse, the herd was being deliberately pushed by 3 riders, whooping and firing pistols in the air, driving the cattle toward Calhoun's land. "Stay here," Travis ordered, swinging into his saddle. "Like hell I will," Julia shot back, mounting her own horse. "Those are my cattle." Travis looked like he wanted to argue, but apparently recognized the futility. Together, they rode hard, circling around the spooked herd, trying to turn them back toward their own range. It was dangerous work. Frightened cattle could trample anything in their path, and the riders pushing them were armed and hostile. Travis cut in front of the lead steers, firing his pistol in the air, using his horse to block their path. The herd began to slow, confused by the conflicting signals. Julia worked the flank, pushing them back toward the gap in the fence. The 3 riders who had been driving the cattle pulled up short, apparently not expecting resistance. One of them Julia recognized as a Calhoun employee named Jack Hendricks, a mean drunk who had been run out of 3 towns for brawling. He leveled his pistol at Travis with clear intent. "You are making a mistake, Morgan," Hendricks called out. "These cattle strayed onto Calhoun land. We are just protecting our boss's property." "The fence was cut," Travis replied, his voice carrying clearly. "That makes this theft, not stray cattle. Turn around and ride away, and we will let it go. Push this further, and I will ride into South Pass City and bring back the territorial marshal." "There is no marshal within 50 miles, Hendricks said with a nasty grin. "Then I will ride 50 miles, Travis said flatly. "Your choice." The standoff held for several long seconds. Finally, Hendricks spat in the dirt and holstered his weapon. "This is not over. Calhoun always gets what he wants." "Not this time," Travis said. The 3 riders retreated, and Julia and Travis spent the next 2 hours rounding up the scattered cattle and driving them back through the fence. Once the herd was secure, Travis spent another hour repairing the cut wire while Julia stood guard. By the time they made it back to the house, Both were exhausted and covered in dust. "We cannot keep fighting like this," Julia said quietly as they unsaddled the horses in the barn. "Calhoun has money, hired guns, and apparently no conscience. What do we have?" "Stubbornness," Travis replied, and this time he definitely smiled. "And the law on our side, if we can find someone willing to enforce it." "The territorial courts are in Raymond Calhoun's pocket," Julia said bitterly. "Everyone knows that." "Maybe," Travis allowed, "but there are other options. Federal land courts, the territorial governor in Cheyenne, newspapermen who like stories about powerful ranchers stealing from orphans. We just have to be smart about this." Julia looked at him in the dim light of the barn, at this man who had ridden into her life and turned himself into her champion without asking for anything in return. "Why are you really doing this, Travis? The truth this time." Travis was quiet for a long moment, running his hand along his horse's neck. "Because I have spent my whole life watching people take things that did not belong to them. Land, money, lives. I have watched men use strength and violence to steal from the weak, and I have watched the law look the other way because it was convenient or profitable. Your father showed me kindness when he did not have to. You're trying to hold on to something your family built with honest work. That matters. It should matter more than Calhoun's greed." He paused, then added more quietly, "And because you remind me that there are still things worth fighting for in this world." Something in his tone made Julia's breath catch. She had been so focused on surviving, on fighting to keep her land, that she had not let herself think about anything else. But standing here in the gathering darkness, looking at this man who had appointed himself her protector, she felt something shift inside her chest. It was not just gratitude, though she felt that. It was not just respect, though he had certainly earned it. It was something warmer and more dangerous, a recognition that maybe Travis Morgan had not just been fighting for her land. Maybe he had been fighting for her. "I should get dinner started," she said, suddenly needing to break the intensity of the moment. Travis nodded, but his eyes held hers for a second longer than necessary. "I will finish up here and be in shortly." Julia walked back to the house on legs that felt strangely unsteady. She had been alone for so long, first functionally alone while nursing her dying father, then truly alone after he passed. She had convinced herself that solitude was strength, that needing anyone was weakness. But Travis had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had been too proud to speak, and she was starting to realize that strength and solitude were not the same thing at all. The attacks from the Calhouns continued, but they grew more subtle. Supplies ordered from South Pass City failed to arrive. The bank where Julia kept her small savings suddenly discovered irregularities in her account that required immediate resolution. She rode into town to find that merchants who had always been friendly now looked at her with cool suspicion. The whisper campaign had begun, painting her as difficult, unstable, unable to manage her affairs. Travis accompanied her to town, his presence a silent counterpoint to the rumors. He was unfailingly courteous, paying for supplies with his own money when merchants refused Julia's credit, standing calm and watchful whenever anyone approached them. His reputation as a former lawman preceded him, and while that did not win them friends, it at least ensured a basic level of civility. One afternoon, they were leaving the general store when they nearly collided with Marcus Calhoun on the wooden sidewalk. The younger Calhoun looked Julia up and down with an expression that made her skin crawl. "Miss Daniels," he said, touching his hat brim in a gesture that mocked politeness, "you're looking tired. Ranch work must be wearing on you." "I'm managing just fine," Julia replied coolly. "Are you?" Marcus let his gaze drift to Travis. "Word around town is that you are living alone with a hired man. That does not look good for a respectable young lady. People are talking." Julia felt anger flare hot in her chest. People should mind their own business. "In a small town, everyone's business is everyone's business," Marcus said with a cruel smile. "My father has been saying that you are unfit to manage the ranch. Behavior like this just proves his point. The territorial court might very well decide you need a guardian to manage your affairs, someone responsible, someone male." Travis stepped forward, putting himself between Julia and Marcus. "You might want to think carefully about your next words," he said quietly. Marcus's hand drifted toward his gun. "You threatening me, Morgan?" "Stating a fact," Travis replied. "You are slandering a woman's reputation in public. That is not just ungentlemanly, It is actionable. Keep talking and we will see how Judge Morrison feels about defamation. My father owns Judge Morrison, Marcus shot back. Maybe, Travis agreed, but I spent 10 years as a lawman, and I know plenty of judges your father does not own. Push this further, and we will find out. Marcus stared at Travis for a long moment, then apparently decided discretion was the better part of valor. He stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy. Enjoy your reputation while you still have one, Miss Daniels. These things have a way of catching up with people. They walked to their horses in tense silence. Julia was shaking with anger and humiliation. Once they were clear of town, she let herself speak. He is right, she said bitterly. People will talk. A single woman living alone with a man. It does not matter that nothing improper is happening. The rumor alone could destroy me. Travis rode in silence for a moment. There is a simple solution to that problem. Julia looked at him sharply. What do you mean? He met her eyes directly. Marry me. Julia nearly fell off her horse. What? It makes sense, Travis said, his voice calm and practical. If we are married, there is no scandal. More than that, as your husband, I would have legal standing to defend your claim to the ranch. Calhoun could not argue that you are an unsuitable owner if you have a husband managing things with you. You cannot possibly be serious, Julia said, her mind reeling. Why not? Travis reined in his horse, forcing her to stop as well. We work well together. We respect each other. That is more than most marriages start with, and it would solve multiple problems at once. Marriage is not a business arrangement, Julia protested. It is sometimes, Travis countered, and this would be honest. I'm not asking you to pretend affection you do not feel. I'm suggesting a practical partnership with legal protections. You keep your land, I help you build something worthwhile, and we face the Calhouns together with the law on our side. Julia stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting. It was insane. They had known each other only a few weeks. Marriage was supposed to be about love, about building a life together, not about property disputes and legal maneuvering. And yet, even as she formed those objections, another part of her mind was turning over the possibilities. Travis was right that it would solve problems. More than that, the thought of being married to him was not as shocking as it should have been. She had grown to rely on him, to value his judgment, to find comfort in his presence. Was that enough foundation for a marriage? What about love? She heard herself ask. Travis's expression softened. What about it? I respect you more than any woman I have ever met. I admire your courage and your stubbornness. I like working beside you. Maybe that is not poetry, but it is honest. As for the rest, people have built good marriages on less. You would be tying yourself to a failing ranch and a woman with powerful enemies, Julia pointed out. I would be building something that matters, Travis corrected, and fighting for something worth having. That sounds better than drifting from town to town with no purpose. Julia looked at him, at this bewildering man who had ridden into her life and turned it upside down. Part of her wanted to refuse on principle, to insist that she could handle everything alone. But she was tired of being alone. She was tired of fighting by herself. And if she was honest, the thought of Travis leaving, of waking up one day to find him gone, made her chest ache. If we did this, she said slowly, it would be a real marriage. I will not have people whispering that it is a sham. I would expect nothing less, Travis replied, and you would have to promise to actually talk to me about decisions. This is my ranch, my home. I will not be shut out of managing it just because I have a husband. Agreed, Travis said immediately. Partners in everything, equal say. Julia took a deep breath. This was either the smartest or stupidest decision of her life, and she would not know which until it was too late to change it. All right then, yes, I will marry you. Something that might have been relief crossed Travis's face. We should do it soon. The longer we wait, the more ammunition we give Calhoun's rumor mill. Tomorrow, Julia said decisively. We can find a preacher in South Pass City tomorrow. They rode the rest of the way home in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before, weighted with possibility and change. Julia kept stealing glances at Travis, trying to see him as a husband rather than a hired hand. He was handsome in a weathered way, she acknowledged, strong and capable. She had seen his kindness and his courage, But marriage meant sharing more than work and meals. It meant sharing a life, sharing a bed. The thought made her nervous and strangely excited at the same time. That evening they ate dinner with the strange formality of two people who had just agreed to something momentous. Finally, Travis cleared his throat. "I should say something about expectations," he began awkwardly, "about the marriage itself." Julia felt her cheeks heat, but forced herself to meet his eyes. "What about it?" "I would not expect you to share more than you were comfortable with," Travis said carefully. "This is partly practical arrangement. I understand that. We can take things slowly, let you get used to the idea of being married." It was a generous offer, and Julia recognized that. But it also crystallized something that had been forming in her mind throughout the afternoon. She did not want a marriage of convenience, at least not entirely. She wanted more than that, even if she could not quite articulate what more meant. "Travis," she said quietly, "I appreciate your consideration. But if we are doing this, we should do it properly. I do not want to live like strangers sharing a house. That would be worse than being alone." Travis looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the careful control in his expression crack just slightly. "I was hoping you would say that. The truth is, Julia, this is not just practical for me. I think you are remarkable. I have thought so since the first day I saw you standing on that porch, refusing to back down to armed men. If this is going to be a real marriage, I would like it to be because we both want it, not just because circumstances forced our hand." Julia felt warmth spread through her chest. "I want it," she said simply. "I want you to stay. I want to build something together. And if I am honest, I've been thinking about you as more than a ranch hand for a while now." Travis smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Then we are in agreement. We get married tomorrow and we build a life together. Whatever comes, we face it as a team." "As a team," Julia agreed, and for the first time since her father died, she felt something like hope. They rode into South Pass City the next morning, dressed in their best clothes, which still meant dusty and practical by necessity. The town was quiet, the morning heat already building despite the early hour. They found Reverend Michaels at the small church on the edge of town, a kind-faced man who had officiated at Julia's father's funeral. When they explained what they wanted, the Reverend raised his eyebrows but did not object. "This is rather sudden, is it not?" "We know our own minds," Travis said firmly. "Will you marry us or not?" Reverend Michaels studied them both, then apparently decided he saw something worth supporting. "Very well, but we will need witnesses." Finding witnesses proved surprisingly easy. Sarah Henderson, who ran the boarding house and had always been kind to Julia, agreed immediately. Her husband Robert came along as well, shooting curious but friendly glances at the couple. Within an hour, Julia found herself standing beside Travis in front of the Reverend, speaking vows that would bind them together for life. Travis's voice was steady as he promised to honor and cherish her. Julia's hands trembled slightly as she spoke her own vows, but her voice never wavered. When Reverend Michaels pronounced them husband and wife, Travis leaned down and kissed her gently, a soft brush of lips that somehow promised more than any passionate embrace could have. "Congratulations, Mrs. Morgan," he murmured against her hair. "Mrs. Morgan. Julia Daniels Morgan." The name felt strange and right at the same time. They signed the register, paid the Reverend's fee, and accepted congratulations from the Hendersons. It was done. She was married. They were walking back to their horses when Raymond Calhoun stepped out of the bank across the street. His eyes went immediately to Julia's left hand, to the plain gold band Travis had purchased from the general store that morning. His expression darkened dangerously. "Married," he said flatly. "How convenient." "Congratulate us, Mr. Calhoun," Travis said mildly. "My wife and I are starting our life together." "Your wife," Calhoun repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. How very quick, almost as if it was arranged to circumvent certain legal difficulties. "There is nothing illegal about getting married," Julia said, finding courage in Travis's solid presence beside her. "Perhaps not," Calhoun acknowledged, "but it does not change the fundamentals. That ranch is failing. You have no capital, no experience, and no prospects. Sooner or later, you will default on your taxes or your supply debts, and when you do, I will be there to purchase the property at auction. All you have done is delay the inevitable, Travis stepped forward until he was almost nose to nose with the older man. "Let me make something very clear, Mr. Calhoun. That ranch belongs to my wife now, and I stand behind her claim. You want to challenge us in court? Go ahead. But I promise you, we will fight every step of the way, and we will make sure everyone from here to Cheyenne knows exactly what tactics you are using. How do you think that will play with the territorial governor, with the federal land office, with honest ranchers who might start wondering if they will be next?" Calhoun's face had gone red with anger. "You are making a very serious enemy, Morgan." "I have had enemies before," Travis replied calmly. "I am still here. Think about that." He took Julia's arm and guided her toward their horses, leaving Calhoun fuming on the sidewalk. They rode out of town quickly, and Julia felt a wild kind of exhilaration building in her chest. She was married. She had a partner. For the first time since her father's death, she did not feel alone. The reality of marriage hit her that evening as they prepared for bed. Travis had been sleeping in the barn since arriving at the ranch, but that was clearly no longer appropriate. The house had 2 bedrooms, but Julia found herself leading him to the larger one, the one that had been her parents', that had been hers alone since her mother died. They moved around each other awkwardly at first, unsure of the new dynamics. Travis turned his back while Julia changed into her nightdress, and she did the same while he prepared for bed. But when they finally lay down together, the initial awkwardness began to fade. Travis pulled her gently against him, and Julia let herself relax into his warmth. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I think so," Julia replied honestly. "This is strange." "It is," Travis agreed, "but not bad strange. At least, I hope not." Julia turned in his arms until she could see his face in the dim moonlight filtering through the window. "Not bad at all," she said softly. Then, gathering her courage, she leaned up and kissed him. What started as a tentative exploration quickly deepened into something more urgent. Travis kissed her like he had been thinking about it for weeks, with a controlled intensity that made Julia's breath catch. His hands moved carefully over her, always questioning, always giving her space to say no. But Julia did not want to say no. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted to claim this marriage as fully real. Their wedding night was not poetry. It was awkward in places, gentle in others, and intensely real. Julia had a general idea of what happened between married couples, but theory and practice were very different things. Travis was patient, careful, attentive to her responses. When it was over, Julia lay in his arms feeling changed in ways she could not quite articulate. Whatever this marriage had started as, it was genuine now, sealed in the most intimate way possible. "No regrets?" Travis murmured against her hair. "None," Julia replied, and meant it. "You?" "Only that I did not meet you years ago," Travis said quietly. "We could have saved each other a lot of lonely nights." Julia smiled against his chest. "We have time to make up for it now." They fell asleep tangled together, and when Julia woke in the morning to find Travis still there, solid and real beside her, she felt a surge of contentment that was entirely new. The next few weeks settled into a new rhythm. Julia and Travis worked the ranch as partners in every sense, but now their evenings held a different quality. They talked about their pasts, their hopes, their dreams for the future. Travis told her about growing up in Texas, about the endless sky and the hard work of cattle ranching. Julia told him about her mother, about the books her father had insisted she read, about her dream of making the ranch prosperous enough to be self-sustaining. At night, they learned each other's bodies with increasing confidence and pleasure. Julia discovered that Travis had surprising gentleness beneath his tough exterior, that he could make her laugh even in intimate moments, that he seemed genuinely fascinated by every response he drew from her. She learned what made him gasp, what made him lose his careful control, what made him pull her closer with desperate need. But the Calhouns had not disappeared. If anything, Raymond Calhoun's rage at being thwarted had made him more determined. The harassment continued in small ways. Gates left open, water troughs mysteriously damaged, supplies that went missing. Nothing that could be definitively proven, but enough to make life difficult and expensive. Travis rode into South Pass City and sent a telegram to the Territorial Marshal's office in Cheyenne, detailing the harassment and requesting an investigation. The response was disappointing, but not surprising. The Marshal's office was understaffed and dealing with more urgent matters. Unless there was clear evidence of a crime, they could not commit resources to what appeared to be a property dispute. "So we are on our own," Julia said after Travis showed her the telegram response. "For now," Travis agreed. "But that does not mean we are helpless. We just need to be smarter than them." "How do you mean?" Travis leaned back in his chair, thinking. "Calhoun is trying to bleed us dry slowly, make the ranch fail through 1,000 small cuts. What if we did not play that game? What if we went on the offensive?" "How?" Julia asked, intrigued despite herself. Documentation," Travis said. "We document everything, every incident, every threat, every questionable action. We build a case so thorough that even a bought judge would have trouble ignoring it. And we make copies and send them to people Calhoun cannot buy. Newspapermen in Cheyenne, the territorial governor, federal land agents. We make this public and loud enough that it becomes more trouble for Calhoun to steal your land than it is worth." Julia thought about it, then nodded slowly. "It is risky. It might just make him angrier." "He is already as angry as he's going to get," Travis pointed out. "Right now he thinks he can win through intimidation and patience. We need to show him that every day he continues this, we are building a case against him. Eventually, the cost-benefit stops making sense." "All right," Julia said. "We try it your way." They spent the next week meticulously documenting every incident, every piece of evidence of harassment. Travis rode into town and purchased a camera from the photographer, using it to capture the cut fences, the damaged equipment, the evidence of trespassing. Julia wrote detailed accounts of every confrontation, every threat, noting dates and witnesses. They compiled everything into a thick file that painted a damning picture of organized harassment. Then, Travis rode to Cheyenne himself, a 3-day journey each way. He took the file to the territorial governor's office, to the editor of the largest newspaper in the territory, and to the federal land office. He could not guarantee any of them would act, but he could at least ensure the information existed in official records. While he was gone, Julia experienced a sharp anxiety she had not expected. She worried about Travis on the dangerous roads. She worried about the ranch being vulnerable with only her to defend it. But more than that, she realized just how much she had come to depend on his presence, not just for protection, but for companionship. The house felt empty without him. The bed felt too large. She missed his voice, his steadying presence, the way he looked at her like she was something precious. When Travis returned 6 days later, dusty and exhausted, Julia nearly knocked him off his feet with the intensity of her embrace. "I missed you," she said against his chest, not caring that it made her vulnerable to admit it. "I missed you too," Travis replied, holding her tightly. "Every mile of that damned road." That night they made love with an urgency that surprised them both, as if the separation had reminded them how fragile security was, how easily they could be torn apart. Afterward, Travis held her close and spoke quietly in the darkness. "I met with the territorial governor," he said. "He listened. I cannot say if he will act, but at least our story is in the official record now." The newspaper editor was more enthusiastic. "He is planning a series of articles about land disputes in Wyoming territory, and our case will be featured prominently." "Will that help?" Julia asked. "It cannot hurt," Travis replied. "Calhoun thrives on operating in the shadows. Dragging things into the light makes it harder for him to act with impunity." Travis was proven right 2 weeks later when the first article appeared in the Cheyenne newspaper. It was prominently placed on the front page, detailing the attempt by a wealthy rancher to force a young widow off her legally owned property through intimidation and harassment. It named Raymond Calhoun specifically, and quoted extensively from the documentation Travis had provided. The article painted a picture of corruption and greed that was hard to ignore. The response was immediate. The territorial governor's office announced an investigation into land disputes in South Pass City. The federal land office sent an agent to verify property boundaries and deed legitimacies. Most importantly, public opinion, even in South Pass City, began to shift. Not everyone loved Julia and Travis, but many respected their determination. and nobody liked seeing powerful men abuse their position. Raymond Calhoun rode out to the ranch 3 days after the article appeared, but this time he came alone. Julia and Travis met him at the property line, presenting a united front. "You have made a very serious mistake," Calhoun said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "We defended our legal rights," Travis replied calmly. "If you consider that a mistake, that says more about you than us." "That article was full of lies and exaggerations," Calhoun insisted. "Then sue us for libel," Julia suggested. "Take us to court and present your evidence. We would be happy to present ours." Calhoun's jaw worked with anger, but he apparently recognized the trap. Any legal proceedings would just keep the story alive, would invite more scrutiny to his business practices. "This is not over," he said finally. "Actually, I think it is," Travis replied. "You have two choices now. You can continue harassing us, which will just generate more articles, more investigations, and more attention you do not want. Or you can walk away, cut your losses, and find some other piece of land to covet. Either way, this ranch stays with my wife." Julia held her breath, watching calculations run behind Calhoun's eyes. Finally, he yanked his horse's head around and rode away without another word. They watched him disappear over the rise, and Julia allowed herself to breathe again. "Do you think he will give up?" she asked. "I think he will calculate that we are more trouble than we are worth," Travis said carefully. "Men like Calhoun are fundamentally practical. He wanted easy money, and we have made it very difficult. Eventually, he will move on to easier targets." Travis was right. The harassment stopped almost completely after that confrontation. There were no more cut fences, no more mysterious damages, no more attempts to drive off their cattle. The territorial investigation concluded that Julia's property claim was legitimate and that there was sufficient evidence of harassment to warrant official censure of Raymond Calhoun's business practices. It was not criminal charges, but it was public humiliation, and for a man like Calhoun, that mattered. With the immediate threat removed, Julia and Travis could finally focus on actually building the ranch into something profitable. The cattle were healthy, and they managed to negotiate a decent price for their beef with an army contractor passing through the territory. The money was not a fortune, but it was enough to pay debts, purchase supplies, and begin saving for future expansion. Fall arrived with brilliant colors and crisp mornings. Julia and Travis worked together to prepare for winter, stocking supplies, reinforcing buildings, ensuring the cattle had adequate shelter and feed. One evening in October, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset over the mountains, Julia realized she was completely content. This life she had fought so hard to preserve had become even richer than she had imagined, not because of the land, but because of the man beside her. "What are you thinking?" Travis asked, noticing her expression. "That I'm happy," Julia replied simply. "That I cannot remember the last time I felt this way." Travis reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I was just thinking the same thing. I spent so many years drifting, never quite belonging anywhere. And now I have this place, this life, you. It feels like I finally found what I was looking for without even knowing I was searching." Julia turned to look at him, at this man who had become her husband, her partner, her love. Because that is what it was, she realized. She loved him purely and completely, not because he had saved her ranch, but because of who he was. His strength and his gentleness, his integrity and his humor, the way he looked at her like she was the most important thing in his world. "I love you," she said, speaking the words aloud for the first time. Travis's face transformed with a smile. "I love you too. I think I have since the first day I saw you refusing to back down to armed men." He pulled her closer and kissed her deeply, and Julia felt the rightness of everything settle into her bones. This was what she had fought for, this life, this love, this future they would build together. Winter came with heavy snows that turned the ranch into a white wonderland. Julia and Travis spent long evenings by the fire, talking about plans for spring, about expanding the herd, about building a proper barn for horses. They talked about the future, in broader terms too, about children they might have, about the legacy they wanted to build. One February morning, Julia woke feeling unwell. She made it to the basin just in time to lose her breakfast, and Travis was instantly at her side, concerned. I am fine, Julia insisted, though she felt wretched. It must have been something I ate. But when the sickness continued for 3 more days, always in the morning, always followed by strange cravings and unusual fatigue, Julia began to suspect the truth. She counted back carefully and realized her monthly courses were late, very late. She was pregnant. The realization filled her with a complex mix of emotions. Joy, certainly, at the thought of a child. Fear, too, knowing how dangerous childbirth could be on the frontier. And wonder that she and Travis had created a life together, that their love would take physical form in a baby. She waited until evening to tell Travis, choosing her moment carefully. They were sitting by the fire after dinner, and Julia took his hand, placing it gently on her still flat stomach. I think we are going to have a baby, she said quietly. Travis went completely still, his eyes wide with shock. Are you certain? As certain as I can be without a doctor, Julia replied. All the signs are there. I would guess the baby will come in late summer. Travis pulled her into his arms, holding her with exquisite gentleness. A baby, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Julia, that is wonderful. That is the most wonderful thing you could have told me. You are happy? Julia asked, needing to hear it. Happy does not begin to cover it, Travis replied, pulling back to look at her face. Terrified, yes, because I want you and the baby safe and healthy, but happy beyond words. We are going to be parents. Julia felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were good tears, tears of relief and joy. We should get me to a doctor soon, just to make sure everything is progressing well. We will go to Cheyenne if we have to, Travis said immediately. Whatever you need, whatever makes you and the baby safest. The pregnancy progressed well through late winter and into spring. Travis became comically overprotective, insisting Julia rest frequently, taking over the heavier ranch work entirely, treating her like she was made of glass. Julia found it both endearing and exasperating, reassuring him repeatedly that pregnant women had been working on ranches since ranches existed. They made the trip to Cheyenne in April, consulting with a doctor who confirmed that Julia was healthy and the baby was developing normally. He estimated the birth would come in early August and gave them instructions for care and preparation. As summer arrived and Julia's belly swelled noticeably, the reality of impending parenthood became more concrete. Travis spent his evenings building a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it till there were no rough edges that could harm delicate baby skin. Julia sewed tiny clothes, marveling at how small they were, wondering at the person who would wear them. Sarah Henderson came out from South Pass City to visit, bringing practical advice and much-needed female companionship. She had raised 4 children of her own and reassured Julia that while childbirth was difficult, most women came through it just fine, especially with a husband as devoted as Travis clearly was. The baby came on a sweltering August afternoon during a thunderstorm. Julia had been feeling restless all day, and when the first real pain hit, she knew instantly what it meant. Travis sent for Sarah Henderson and the midwife who lived near town, but the storm had made the roads treacherous. It became clear quickly that the baby was not going to wait. Travis delivered his own child with hands that shook, but remained steady when it mattered. He coached Julia through the contractions, held her hand when she screamed, and caught their baby when it finally emerged into the world. A boy, lusty and loud and perfect. We have a son, Travis said, his voice breaking as he placed the baby on Julia's chest. Julia, we have a beautiful son. Julia looked down at the tiny red-faced creature wailing against her skin and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. This was their child, hers and Travis's, a life they had created together. He had dark hair plastered to his skull and eyes that would probably be gray like his father's. He was perfect. What should we name him? She asked, unable to look away from her son. Travis thought for a moment, then said quietly, Michael, after your father. He would have loved to meet his grandson. Julia felt tears stream down her face. Michael Travis Morgan. It is perfect. Sarah and the midwife arrived an hour later, drenched from the storm but ready to help. They found Julia cleaned up and nursing the baby with Travis hovering nearby, looking exhausted and exhilarated. Sarah laughed at the scene. Well, I see you managed without us, she said warmly. Congratulations to you both. The midwife examined Julia and the baby, declared them both healthy, and gave Travis credit for doing an excellent job under pressure. After they left, Julia and Travis lay in bed with their son between them, marveling at the miracle of him. "I cannot believe we made him," Julia whispered. "I cannot believe how much I already love him," Travis replied, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. "And you. Julia, watching you today, your strength and courage, I've never admired anyone more." Julia smiled, exhausted but content. "We did it together. We built this life together." The next few months were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings, but also overwhelming joy. Michael was a healthy baby with strong lungs and an appetite to match. Travis took to fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to everything else, learning to change nappies, walking the floor with a crying baby, singing off key lullabies that somehow worked. The ranch continued to thrive. With the Calhoun threat permanently neutralized and their reputation as hardworking, honest ranchers established, they found it easier to do business in South Pass City. They hired a young man named Danny to help with the heavy work, giving Travis more time to spend with Julia and Michael. One evening in late October, with Michael sleeping peacefully in his cradle and the fire crackling warmly, Julia sat in Travis's arms feeling entirely at peace. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Riding in here that day? Taking on my problems?" Travis was quiet for a moment, then said, "That day changed my life in every possible way. I found a home, a purpose, a family. I found you. How could I regret the best decision I ever made?" "I'm glad you came," Julia said softly. "I did not know how alone I was until you showed me what it was like to have a partner." "We are good together," Travis agreed. "Partners in everything." "Partners in everything," Julia echoed. The years flowed past with the rhythm of ranch life. Michael grew into a sturdy toddler, then a curious child, learning to ride almost before he could walk properly. 2 years after Michael's birth, Julia gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, a sweet-tempered baby with her mother's eyes. Another son, called Samuel, followed 2 years after Rose. The house that had once felt too large for one lonely woman was now filled with laughter and noise and life. The ranch prospered steadily. They expanded the herd, added breeding horses to their operation, and eventually purchased adjoining land that came up for sale. What had started as a desperate attempt to hold onto an inheritance became a thriving family business. Raymond Calhoun faded from their lives, his power diminished by age, and his reputation tarnished by the public exposure of his tactics. His son Marcus left Wyoming territory entirely after a scandal involving marked cards and another man's wife. The Calhoun Ranch was eventually sold to a syndicate from back east. Julia and Travis grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They learned each other's rhythms and silences, supported each other through hard times, celebrated together during good times. They built a life that mattered, raised children who knew they were loved, and created a legacy that extended beyond mere property. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Travis took Julia riding to the hill where her father was buried. They stood looking out over the valley, at the ranch buildings below, at the cattle grazing peacefully, at the neat fences and cultivated fields. "Your father would be proud," Travis said quietly, "of what you have built, of the family you have raised." "Of what we have built," Julia corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you, Travis." Travis put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "That day I rode in here, I told Calhoun that this land belonged to you. I believed it then, and I believe it now. But what I did not know then was that I would belong here too, that this would become my home in every way that matters." Julia leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of the man who had been her champion, her husband, her partner, through everything. "We built something good here." "We did," Travis agreed, "and it will outlast us. Michael is already running most of the day-to-day operations. Rose wants to be a teacher, going to start at the school in South Pass City next year. Samuel talks about studying law in Cheyenne. We raised good kids, Julia." "We did," Julia said, pride warming her voice. "We gave them a foundation, a place to come home to. That matters." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. Below them, their home waited, filled with family and laughter and the accumulated memories of 20 years of marriage. It had not always been easy, but it had been real, and it had been worth fighting for. The rest of their story unfolded with the same rhythm. They watched their children grow into adults who made them proud. Michael married a rancher's daughter from nearby Lander and gave them 3 grandchildren. Rose became a teacher, as she had dreamed, eventually marrying the new doctor who settled in South Pass City. Samuel did study law, eventually becoming a territorial judge known for his fairness and integrity. Julia and Travis grew old together on the ranch they had fought to keep. Their hands became weathered with age, their hair turned silver, but their love remained as strong as it had been that first day when a stranger rode onto her property and declared himself her champion. They spent their evenings on the porch, watching sunsets, holding hands, reminiscing about the years they had shared. When Travis died at 73, peacefully in his sleep, Julia mourned him deeply, but also celebrated the life they had built together. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren, before joining him in the family cemetery on the hill overlooking the valley. Their graves lie side by side under the endless Wyoming sky, 2 people who had found each other when they needed it most and built something lasting out of courage, stubbornness, and love. The ranch they fought for still operates today, now in the hands of great-grandchildren who know the story of how it almost was lost and how a cowboy rode in at exactly the right moment and declared that the land belonged to the woman who would become his wife. It was a love story that started with a threat and ended with a legacy, proving that sometimes the greatest romances begin not with poetry, but with a simple declaration of justice and the courage to stand beside someone when they need it most. Travis Morgan rode onto Julia Daniels's ranch as a stranger offering help, and he left it decades later, having built a life that mattered, having loved a woman who was his equal in every way, and having proved that the best partnerships are built not just on passion, but on respect, trust, and the shared determination to protect what is worth keeping. The land that Travis defended that day became more than just property. It became home, legacy, and the foundation for a family that would carry forward the values he and Julia lived by: honesty, courage, loyalty, and the unshakable belief that some things are worth fighting for. Their story became part of the history of South Pass City, a reminder that in the Wild West, justice did not always come from the law, but sometimes from the determination of ordinary people refusing to let the powerful trample the rights of the vulnerable. And so the ranch remains, a testament to the woman who would not surrender what was rightfully hers and the man who loved her enough to stand beside her through every challenge. Their love story was not the stuff of dime novels, but it was real and lasting and true, which made it worth more than any fiction ever could be.